Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to another Eurocontrol Aviation StraightTalk Live. Delighted you can be here. I'm Andrew Charlton, and today our guest is the CEO and Chairman of British Airways, Mr. Sean Doyle. We've spoken to the airport with which he spends most of his time, of course, last time, but this time we're talking to British Airways itself to see how he's going and how British Airways is going in these most difficult of times, and to see how we can build back better. But as ever, here at Straight Talk, before we start talking to Sean, we will get an update on the market situation from the Director General of Eurocontrol, Mr. Raymond Brennan.
Good afternoon from Brussels. It's a pleasure today to welcome Sean Doyle, the CEO of British Airways, and I look forward to an exciting interview which Andrew will have with him afterwards. We're now in week 60 of the greatest recession that aviation has ever seen. We're looking at a difficult situation throughout the world. We have significant deterioration in India. We have vaccination acceleration rollout in the United States, UK, and starting to gain pace in Europe. And of course, we have all of the various elements discussing about the vaccine debate and whether or not the industry can recover. So let's now have a look at the data. First of all, I think it's just important to mention that in Europe, for the very first time, we are not in the top 10 of airports in 2020. And this is likely to remain the situation in 2021. Nowhere do you see London Heathrow, Charles de Gaulle, Frankfurt. This is a really significant change in where the continent stands after 60 weeks of the pandemic restrictions that we now face in Europe. I think it's also worthwhile looking at where we're at the moment. And where we're at the moment is really specifically stuck at minus 65%. Since I spoke to you less than 1 month ago, we have made virtually no progress. We have continuing quarantines. We have fourth and fifth waves coming throughout Europe. A very difficult situation in the evolution of European aviation. So we really are stagnant at the moment, and hopefully it will improve in the months ahead. If you look, for instance, at the airlines and specifically have a look yesterday at British Airways, you can see a huge reduction in capacity. There's nothing new here. We've been looking at this for the last number of months. Realistically, aviation has made no progress in Europe since the start of the year, and if anything, the situation has deteriorated. It's also worth looking at where we are in terms of the world. So if we look at Europe, nothing much happening there, 68% reduction. Contrast that with the United States, where you have a minus 30% reduction in their domestic, which is basically the equivalent of Europe. And interestingly, China has yesterday had an increase of 10% in domestic operations. But as you can see, intercontinental operations remain stuck. And with variants of the virus, it's going to be difficult to see how this is going to return, at least until the last quarter of the year. I also think it's worth looking at the vaccine progress. And this is key to the discussion that I'm sure Sean will have with Andrew, is if you look at the United States and the United Kingdom, they're both roughly 6 to 8 weeks ahead of Europe in terms of vaccine rollout. Now, what does this mean? Well, what it means in effect is that it's going to be a late summer in Europe. It means that it'll be July before Europe starts rolling again. And in terms of long haul, it'll be significantly later, particularly to Asia and to China. You might see corridors open with the US and the UK much sooner. And when you look at that chart, you can actually see why. So the message here is we've probably got another 7 to 8 weeks of vaccine rollout in Europe before we catch up with the two key markets of the United States and the United Kingdom. And that provides a very big challenge for us. I also think it's worth looking at what the good news are. And the good news is that, yes, there are some positives in terms of the vaccine rollout with Singapore, the Trans-Tasman bubble with Australia. And generally, I very much welcome the technical specifications for the Digital Green Certificate, which were published by the European Commission last week. This is a very important enabler. It means you can start integrating it into airline apps. And of course, various states are taking their own individual action, and it's very much a national level at the moment. It's still very difficult to coordinate it. You can see where Greece will eliminate quarantine ahead of travel in May. It's also worth looking at the UK. If you look at the UK, really centre of Europe when it comes to intercontinental connections, and a huge hub, London Heathrow. And you can see the vast outreach that they've had over the last number of years. Currently in potential talks with the US over a potential travel corridor, and this is underpinned by the strong vaccine performance of both countries. And also, of course, the vaccine certificate. We're looking at various countries who've done very well, like Israel, etc., and it's all very good. Over the last year, British Airways has been very conservative in the way that it has managed its capacity. And you can see that basically when you look at the progress of the carriers over the last year, rose last summer, pulled back again into winter. But really the message for me is that we've actually, in the last 14 months, we've actually gone nowhere. All these carriers are losing large amounts of money, finding it very difficult to sustain operations. And remember, the airports as well are finding it very difficult. No passengers, the air navigation service providers, no fees. So all in all, it's a really difficult situation for the industry. So just to conclude, where are we? Well, from our point of view in Eurocontrol, we're looking at a late summer. We're looking at traffic starting to return in Europe in July significantly. And that is basically when the vaccine starts to get rolled out a little bit more successfully. We should see cases starting to reduce and we should see travel starting to increase. But remember, what I mean by a late summer is it will be really August, September before we start seeing any significant international travel, in our view, in Europe. Long haul will return probably in October, November towards Asia, again assuming a vaccination rollout, and of course the variant issue as well. So we're still faced with considerable uncertainty in aviation in Europe. So, month by month, we look at it, we make a little bit of progress, we go forward, we go back. So I'm really looking forward to this debate today between Sean Doyle, CEO of British Airways, and Andrew Charlton, and the best of luck and enjoy the debate, guys. Thank you.
Sean, welcome to Straight Talk. Thanks for joining us.
Andrew, thanks for having me on. I'm delighted to join you this afternoon, and it's a great time to come on and discuss all the things going on in BA in the industry.
It's funny, isn't it? I mean, at one level, nothing's going on. All flight activities down. But there seems to be quite a lot going on in the background. I mean, only today we've, of course, heard, or indeed over the weekend, we heard that in Europe they're now considering flights for vaccinated people between the US. We're starting to look at travel corridors. We heard Eoghan talking about vaccinations. Are you optimistic or are you pessimistic?
Well, look, I think the first thing to read into this is there is an appreciation growing of the importance of aviation. And I think when we come out of the pandemic, and hopefully we are on the path out of the pandemic, if you want to rebuild economies, you're going to have to rebuild aviation networks. So I think the penny is dropping with regulators and with politicians and policymakers, and I think that's good. I think we do need to move in a quicker and more coordinated way. Trust me, we want to get travel back up and running safely. And if you think about where we are this year compared to where we were last year, we've got three things that we can exploit. One is vaccination progress, and Eamon's slides, I think, say it all really. We will in the next 8 weeks be in a fundamentally different position in Europe on rates of vaccination, and the US and the UK are tracking well. I think secondly, we have the ability to test in a very affordable and pragmatic way. In the UK today, we can test 1.6 million people, and that's very different to where we were this time last year. And I think the third thing we can do is we can use digital technology and apps to kind of provide verification status for travellers and allow borders to open up. So, I think we can, craft solutions that can get the industry back up and running in a far more compelling way than we would have done at any other time in the pandemic.
So you are somewhat optimistic by the sounds of it.
Well, I think you need to be in our business, and I think you need to plan for various scenarios. But you got to, I think, push forward the agenda of how we can open up safely. And I think, we're 12 months into this. We've learned a lot. But I think, exploiting vaccinations, exploiting testing and exploiting technology as a combined package there is a very apparent solution there for the industry to get up and running again.
What I'm seeing, though, in those packages is that each airline, each country, each airport seems to be developing their own process. Is there a need for some sort of unification there?
I think there is a need for coordination, and I think it's a missed opportunity if we don't seize that opportunity. And I think I agree. If I look at the UK framework that came out a couple of weeks ago, it's got 3 tiers of risk, which we kind of understand the need to tier risk. But within that, there are some complicated and expensive testing protocols which we think aren't necessary. And we would encourage the UK to look beyond the framework that it's developing and see what other countries are doing who might be managing these risks in a more pragmatic way. So I think if there were one set of rules for opening up travel, because we're all trying to manage the same risks, that would be a lot better than the fragmented approach that we're seeing today.
Right. Let's just focus on the tests for a moment, because currently if you're in an amber country and you're coming back to the UK, you have to have pre-purchased 2 PCR tests. You can have then the option of opting out halfway through, but you still need to purchase a 3rd test. They're over £100 each, aren't they?
Well, we've been working hard over the last couple of weeks to bring down the cost of those tests. So we're now putting on the market testing solutions which are about £50 or £60. And I think the government can do more in terms of VAT on tests as well. That would alleviate the cost for travellers, because, you're right. As it stands, it's complicated and it's expensive, and it runs the risk of, excluding a number of people from being able to travel. And I don't think that would be the intent of the policy. But the other thing we would encourage the government to do is to look at the data. We did some trials with Oxera and Edge Health, and that showed that a pre-departure test at -72, followed by 1 test 3 days after arrival, eliminates about 90% of infectious days. So why we need the level of testing to the standard that's specified in amber, we haven't seen the data to support that level of complexity. So, the UK government have said they will review the framework at future, touch points, but we got to make this simpler and more accessible.
Right. Do you anticipate that, we heard Eamon say that by about the end of July, August, Europe will be at a sort of level similar to the UK. Do you anticipate that this summer we'll mainly see European travel rather than long-haul travel?
I think we would see opportunities in both. I think the US is a great opportunity to get up and running again. And if you look at the progress of vaccinations that the UK and the US have made, they're almost neck and neck. Mm-hmm. So I think opening up an air corridor that leads to the repeal of the restrictions on non-US travellers between the UK and also between Europe and the US is something which I think can be easily achieved if we have the right will on both sides of the pond. And I think Europe, you're right, Europe will make progress. I think the rate of vaccination is now over 2.5 million a day. Countries like Germany are vaccinating 600,000-700,000 people a day, and that will scale through May. And I do think in June you will see the tipping points which bring the pandemic back into kind of the range of infectiousness that we're seeing in the UK, and give confidence back for people to travel. So look, I think, you look at Israel and the UK, the data is very encouraging, and you look at the progress on rollouts, I think it does give you room for optimism that Europe will be able to open up.
Right. Of course, the counter argument to all that is Chile, which had a rate of immunisation or vaccination very similar to Israel. Then it opened up too early, and the next thing you know, they've had to put the barriers back up again. But I guess you surely agree that there needs to be a cautious approach to this rather than a bull at a gate like approach. Yeah,
look, I think we need to be risk-based. In aviation, we manage risk every day. If you look at the crises we've had to encounter in the past, we take an onion layer approach. You have multiple interventions. They all add up to an effective mitigation of risk. And I think some of the protocols we've proposed and the trials we've done show that it can be done. So I think we can get meaningful travel up and running, and I don't think it will jeopardise the ability to contain the pandemic. But risk will always be there. I think coronavirus is part of what we got to live alongside, and we've got to find a way of living alongside it effectively. It's not going to go away, and it's going to be a feature of the way we've got to reboot the economy. So I think mitigation and coexistence has got to be, the objectives we're aiming for, because I think it's, inappropriate to apply an elimination type framework to aviation when other parts of the economy are learning to live alongside the pandemic.
Yeah. Eamon, in his presentation, said that you'd been very conservative with your capacity. You've really reduced the amount of services that you're operating and so forth. Do you see the A380s ever coming back, for example?
Yeah, the A380s are in our plans, and it's partly driven by the wider fleet decisions that we made last year. We retired 31 747s, which is a significant part of our fleet, but it was the right thing to do, considering what we were facing into, and also considering the opportunity to kind of modernize our fleet and to bring more modern, sustainable aircraft in. So I think in that context of the decisions we've already taken, there is a home for the A380 in British Airways network. And we use it for multiple missions. We can fly to Asia, to places like Hong Kong and Singapore. We've also deployed it into places like Boston and Dulles and Miami. So it works on the east coast of the US, and it can work on longer range missions into the bigger Asian markets. And I think when you're looking at the efficiency of a hub like Heathrow, we certainly see the A380 as having a future in those plans.
Do you have any plans to do sort of ultra long haul? You've got A350-1000s, which is the aircraft Qantas is using to go non-stop to Sydney. Are you looking at destinations like that?
We don't have plans to kind of look at bespoke operations like that. I think, we fly to more dots on the map as an international carrier than anybody else. And I think at the minute, the range we have is fit for purpose. I could understand why Qantas would look at ultra long range, considering, the location of its home market. But I think for a hub carrier like BA, we're happy with the range that we have with the 350-1000 and the 300 ERs.
So do you see BA's future in that sort of long haul, in the beyond Europe long haul destination, international as opposed to regional European flying?
I think it's a mix of both. We're sitting on a very strong hub. That hub is backboned by a great geographic location to serve the North Atlantic. We sit on a very strong local market as well in terms of the sheer size of the O&D market in and out of London is significant from every destination we fly to. But also we have a hub which reaches into Africa and the Middle East. So I think we've multiple connections that we offer over the Heathrow hub, and Europe will continue to be a very important part of it. But we were expanding our network both east and west. We had gotten up to 30 plus destinations in the North American market that we flew to before the pandemic. Places like New Orleans were added to the network, Austin, Texas, we flew to Nashville. And then if you look to the east, we had to reinstate Kuala Lumpur. We were flying to Osaka, as well as trying to expand our network into China. So I think you will see the long haul network move in both directions. But the European connectivity will be an important part of our hub proposition that we offer.
So speaking of your hub, and Eamon raised this point as well, how do you see the relationship, not only with Heathrow, although that's obviously worth a straight talk all on its own, I suspect, but your relationship with the airports and the ANSPs going forward? As Eamon pointed out, they're all of them bleeding cash at the moment.
But I think we need to look at what the future will be like and work together, I think, to make the system more efficient. So if we think of Eurocontrol and the vision for a single European skies, that's going to be more compelling than ever, because I think sustainability is going to be a huge feature of what we're going to have to, I think, have a very compelling story on. And we're all going to have to be in the system more sustainable. And I think if we work with airports and ANSPs and Eurocontrol to eliminate waste and reduce carbon footprint, that's a goal we should all be kicking towards. I think the second thing we got to realise is that air travel is, by its nature, competitive, and that we need to be competitive, and Heathrow needs to be competitive as a hub. It doesn't live in splendid isolation from other competitors in the same way that we don't. So I think coming out of the pandemic, value for money is going to be as important as ever. And I think with the way demand may emerge as well, being competitive is going to be a fundamental.
Do you see massive structural change in both in the aviation industry more generally, in the airline industry, but also then in the services, airports, ANSPs, whatever?
Well, I think if we look at the way, Heathrow, for instance, and what BA can do, the one thing I would say is we do have opportunities to reinstate services over hubs a bit more quickly than, spoke-to-spoke operations.
Right.
And if I look across the North Atlantic, I see a lot of fleet types like 767s and 757s have retired. And they would have been operating out of hubs or spokes into secondary markets. And I do think that the hubs will be offering solutions to travellers in the recovery period, to get from A to B that won't be served by, the kind of narrow body operations that we saw in the past. So I think if we can make the hub more efficient and more compelling from a passenger perspective, there are opportunities to win share and recover more quickly. But I think that requires a very tight level of coordination, and we know there is room for improvement in the system.
Mm. Well, absolutely. Do you think that in the ANSPs, for example, we've got too many? Should there be consolidation, that sort of change?
Yeah, I would argue that with consolidation, you get scale and you get efficiency and you can get the deployment of best practice. So if you compare, I suppose, the skies over Europe to other aviation markets, it is, by design or by legacy, complicated. And, even if we don't necessarily reduce the number of ANSPs, I think being able to operate as a virtual single open skies is very, very important.
Right. So what about in the airline area? Do you think there'll be consolidation in the airlines? Do you think we'll have fewer going forward?
Well, I think it'll be more competitive coming out the other end. And we have a lot
Does
of airlines.
Does that mean fewer?
Well, I think it'll be tough. And airlines that have restructured and have kind of adapted to the new reality, I think will come through, and those that haven't won't. So I think you will have two dynamics emerge. I think you will see, some airlines I don't think will survive the other end of the crisis because it will be, a choppy path to recovery. And secondly, I think that inevitably leads to consolidation. I think if you look back at other crises and what's happened, we will see a repeat of those type of dynamics play out. But exactly what that looks like, we've got to wait and see.
Right. So turning to sustainability, you've already mentioned it a couple of times. The pandemic is now, but the sustainability crisis is existential, isn't it? How do you see the way forward for airlines?
I think it is developed an energy that we haven't seen before over the last couple of years. But I think we've been anticipating that sustainability would become probably, the dominant theme of aviation, and it is fast becoming a very dominant theme. But we've got sort of multiple paths and a strong story to tell, I think, if we join up as an industry. But it will take time. If you look at the flight path to net zero that we communicated 18 months ago, we think it will take until 2050 for aviation to get to a net carbon position. And until then, I think we're going to need a number of initiatives that underpin our path. The first is we invest in new modern aircraft. And I mentioned the 747s that are retiring. They're being replaced by 787s and A350s. And those aircraft have up to a 40% reduction in fuel output and carbon efficiency improvements. Secondly, we need to find a greater pipeline of sustainable aviation fuel. And we're very committed to sustainable aviation fuel. We've signed a supply deal with LanzaJet in the US. We're very keen to develop a plant in the UK with Velocys. And we also committed as a group last week to having a SAF mandate of 10% on all of our flights by 2030. And I think that opportunity is very immediate and it can be pursued quite quickly. And you can incorporate sustainable aviation fuel into the existing ecosystem without any pain for the wider infrastructure. Thirdly, we need to place bets on emerging technologies. People are getting excited about hydrogen, and we've invested in a JV with ZeroAvia. But I think that will take longer. We may see in 10 years' time regional lift provided by hydrogen-powered or battery-powered aircraft. But I think to get bigger aircraft powered by alternative fuels, we're looking at maybe 15 to 20, 25 years away. And finally, we've got to make the most of CORSIA. We were a very strong advocate of CORSIA. We got to remember we're the first industry to self-regulate for emissions, so we shouldn't lose sight of that. But CORSIA can be evolved into something which is more than just carbon neutral growth. It can drive the right framework for both offsets, but also I think to incentivize the investment in carbon capture technologies as well. But I think we'll need it all. But we need to get out there and tell the story with confidence. Because you're right, I think the energy, both politically and from a society perspective around the environment keeps on building.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? And so what about the question of taxing fuel? Things like, aviation gets the benefit of a tax exemption for international flights. Do you think aviation fuel should be taxed?
We're one of the most taxed industries in the world already. And in the UK, we're the most taxed airline industry in the globe. So what happens with taxation is it will simply increase prices for consumers, and we've no sight of it being deployed into initiatives that make the industry more sustainable. So a better pathway is to create the right framework and the right incentives for the industry to reduce its carbon footprint along the lines that I spoke about. then I think we've got a very tangible connection between the ability to offset carbon that we can put into development and innovation, and the story that we tell to consumers that the cost of carbon offset goes towards making the industry carbon neutral. But there's a much greater tangibility between that type of economic structure than there is between, blanket taxation.
So, but I mean, it's interesting you say that, because of course, Corsia is run by an international organisation. Governments get involved. Wouldn't it be better if the industry itself did it as the industry and got to direct the funds to wherever they want to go? Why are we standing back and letting governments take control?
Well, I think we need to work with government in this area, but and we need to find a global framework, Andrew, to avoid distortions, And I think that's very, very important that one country doesn't take a position which inadvertently kind of disadvantages the aviation industry in that market, but creates a competitive advantage in another market. So that's why I think we need a global framework. And I think Corsia is a start rather than an end, and we need to work as an industry to make it more effective. But, I think we need to be proactive, I agree, in telling our story and take the initiative rather than have the initiative taken for us.
There's no question of that. I completely agree with that. Your predecessor at BA made a virtue of cost cutting. He was very strong on the cost cutting, sometimes perhaps taking a little bit of, not just the fat, but some of the muscle. But do you see cost cutting as the way forward or continuing for BA?
Look, I think at the heart of what airlines have to do is offer value for money, and you got to stay competitive. And if that means addressing areas where you're not competitive or wasting money, I wouldn't apologise for doing that. But ultimately, you're there to kind of serve your customers' needs. And I think everything we will do will be driven by customer insight. So we know value for money is important for customers, and I think that places an onus on us to be efficient. But at the same time, we know that investment is important to customers. And I've come in the last 6 months, I've looked at the investments that we have up and running, and I think they're very exciting. We had a $6.5 billion investment program launched a couple of years ago, which involves structural investments like modern aircraft with a new Club World suite, which is now being rolled out, Wi-Fi on all of our flights, improvements in catering, improvements in lounges. That will continue, and we'll be very driven by what our customers are telling us they want and what their expectations are of the brand. But we will be efficient as well, and we'll offer value for money. But I don't think those two disciplines in the business are incompatible.
Right. One of your largest shareholders, Qatar Airways, recently was quite damning of BA, thought that you weren't doing dreadfully well. Have you got a response to that?
I'm looking ahead at what we're working on, and I'm very excited by the things we have in train and the impact that it will have on the perception of British Airways. And we are driven very much by the insight we do into what our customers tell us they want, and we're adapting our investments accordingly. We've done some very exciting things over the last 12 months, and it's hard to kind of talk in an excited way about the last 12 months, but we've been very innovative. If you walk into a British Airways lounge, you can scan a QR code. You can then select from a menu what you would like to eat and drink, and we will hand deliver that to you, because customers wanted a customized experience, which was contactless, and we've met that expectation. But now we're learning a lot more about where customers want to sit, what kind of experience they want in a lounge, and what they're consuming. So the product will be better as a result of the kind of innovations that we're working on. Look, I don't hide from the fact that we're a very, very strong brand and that people have high expectations of us. And the bar is set high for British Airways, and we'll aim to meet that bar. But I'm excited about what the future holds. And I think when we begin to get back up and running and people see the effect of the investments we've been making, I think you will see the kind of perception shift in the right direction.
Right,
and it already is from what we're seeing.
So you're obviously focusing with your improvements to club class and the lounges and what have you. You're assuming that the business class market will return.
I think how each segment recovers is still a matter for debate, and I think in the early stages we've assumed that leisure and VFR recover first and business travel lags that. I think we're hearing kind of conflicting stories. I've heard a lot of reports of dissatisfaction with home working, and people are very fed up with Zoom meetings and Teams meetings, and I can understand why. And we're also seeing policies which are requiring companies to have people in the office a lot more than people would have expected a couple of months ago. I was talking to a number of accountancy firms and consultancy firms, and they were saying that when they're bringing people into their organization, like new graduates, the culture of the organization is very important. And doing that over remote home working isn't achieved effectively. So they want people to work with people and to learn by osmosis and to kind of learn on the job. So we do see, I think, business activity becoming back in line more with face-to-face interactions. And then I think we will see business travel recover because people do business with people and not organizations. But exactly what shape that takes, we're not sure. But I think the reason we're very compelled by the investments we're making is we also have a very significant premium leisure segment. And an awful lot of people who travel in both our premium cabins and in our cabins like premium economy are people traveling for leisure or traveling for visiting friends and relatives. That's been growing over the last decade, and we think that will continue to grow. And that gives us a very effective buffer if the corporate segment is not recovering at the pace of the other segments.
Right. So where do you see the industry and then BA's role within it in about 10 years? Are we back to the old days, or is it going to be different?
I think any disruption like we've seen, you never get back to the old days. I think there is a new reality emerges. I think the first thing is sustainability, which we spoke about. That's going to be a fundamental part of aviation's operating model. And I think airlines that grapple with it and have a strong story to tell and make the right investments in sustainability, will have a prosperous future. I think secondly, technology will play an increasing part of how we run the airline in terms of both the insights and the data we have, but also the way I think we'll be able to curate personalized experiences. We are launching pre-order capability for a catering experience in our short-haul cabins. So more and more when people get to the airport, I think understanding how the experience works in a very personal way for them will be very much part of what we're able to offer. And I think that's very, very exciting. And it gives us big opportunities, I think, to win loyalty. And thirdly, I do think that, we're going to have to be pushing the boundaries on new technologies. And it will be very exciting to see, I suppose, a transition to new forms of propulsion. Because I think both the investment and the innovation that will take place over the next 10 years, I think will herald the dawn of a new era for the way we power aircraft. And I think it will be challenging, but very exciting.
I wish I'd ended with that question, really, because that's so optimistic and so forward-looking. But I'm going to have to ask you a couple more, I'm afraid. Hopefully not bringing the mood down too far. We've seen over the crisis a lot of airlines getting bailed out by their states. We've seen a lot of airlines now having state ownership again. I mean, BA led the charge with privatisation, of course, back in 88, 89. And, of course, we've also got a lot of state-owned airlines anyway. There has been over the years a lot of complaint about state aid and state-owned airlines, which BA has very famously stayed away from, refused to get involved in. Do you still maintain that position?
I think our position has been very clear, I suppose. One, the pandemic is unprecedented. So I think governments intervening in the form of payroll support and lines of credit is something that we've encouraged and welcomed, and we've availed of that. We've taken advantage of the furlough schemes in the UK, and we've also availed of credit facilities on commercial terms from UK government institutions. So I don't think we've been unambiguous about our position in relation to those type of supports. I think we get back to the principle that airlines are better run as a business. And I think the industry has been better since we've been moving towards private ownership. And I think airlines that are run as businesses coming out the other end will be better for it. And I would sort of, leave our position at that, really. We're quick to make decisions. We're quick to respond to the downturn. And I think we'll be quick to respond to the recovery as well. And that's the kind of agility we like to keep in our business.
Right. That's certainly interesting. Now, my last question that I always ask is what more do you think Eurocontrol can do to help facilitate European aviation as we come out of this crisis?
Well, the first thing I'd say is keep doing what you're doing. I think the communication is fantastic. I think we use Eurocontrol data to kind of, benchmark what's going on across the market. And it's very insightful. And I think the hard talk sessions are great as well. Because it's encouraging, a lot of much needed debate about how we get aviation out the other end. But I think Eurocontrol can also influence policy. And I think you're able to kind of collate the inputs of various airlines and coordinate them into, I think, a collective position that can be advocated for. And that's very important. Eamon did a great chart last year, which said if we're coordinated coming out of the pandemic, here's what we can do to recover aviation. And if we're uncoordinated, we'll be less effective. And I think, if we can achieve some degree of advocacy for coordination through the voice of Eurocontrol, let's keep it up. But finally, the vision to use data, to use technology to make the skies more efficient, to manage airspace better, and to work with every stakeholder to reform airspace. That's going to be very important when we get back up to operations of scale, both from a customer service perspective, but also from an environmental perspective.
Right. Sean, thank you so much for your time today. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure you agree that was really insightful, and I've certainly learned a lot. I'm sure you did as well. I'd like to thank Sean again for his time. We'll be back in a couple of weeks talking to Istanbul Airport's CEO, and then after that, and that's Kadri Samasulu, and then after that, Tony Douglas from Etihad Airways in the Middle East. So that's something else to look forward to. I look forward to seeing you then. And in the meantime, I thank Sean one more time, and I wish you all a very good day.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.